Most Americans have either been directly or indirectly impacted from the global supply chain shortage following the pandemic originating from communist China. Keith Krach was a very successful CEO, as well as former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, and we're happy to have him on to discuss. Keith Krach, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure, Keith. When it comes to computer chips, semiconductors, it's something most of us don't really spend much time thinking about in our day-to-day lives, although we use them so much. However, this industry has been severely affected by the pandemic. Why do you think that is, and where are some of our biggest vulnerabilities?
Well, there's no doubt about it, Steve, that the semiconductor industry is the most important industry in the world. It underlies all technology. And what happened during the pandemic is a lot of companies canceled a lot of orders, and there's a long lead time on these semiconductors. The other thing, too, is that when we put sanctions on some of China's companies, they stockpiled a lot of those chips. And it's kind of the combination that has created that shortage.
Now, you mentioned China. TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, they're actually building a major plant in the U.S., partially to combat China's acquisition of so many of these parts and the monopoly on the market. How effective do you think this will be, and what more can or should be done?
Well, I think it's really critical. And when I was under Secretary of State, we got the charge to onshore TSMC. And this was the largest onshoring in history, $12 billion, because they're the most sophisticated semiconductor manufacturer in the world. Now, we also used that onshoring to do a number of things. The first thing we did was to utilize that to persuade companies like Intel and Samsung to onshore, because we had been trying to get them to build their plants in the U.S. as opposed to Ireland and Israel and China and South Korea, a number of places. The other thing is to bring in the ecosystem of suppliers and really ramp that up. And we also use it as a catalyst to work with Senator Warren and Senator Cornyn to write the $280 billion Chips and Science Act, which, as you know, recently passed in August. Is going to have a dramatic effect. Now, since that onshoring, $300 billion of investment has been announced or committed in the U.S. When you look at Intel did come in with $20 billion in Arizona and followed up with up to $100 billion. In addition, in Ohio, Samsung came in with $17 billion. Micron announced $20 billion and up to another $100 billion. Texas Instruments, $9 billion of ecosystems suppliers. So, this will go down as the greatest onshoring in history.
Keith, these supply chain shortages truly impact our quality of life, and it's almost not really able to quantify. We're still seeing shortages in vehicles and other products. Certain automobiles can't even get leather seating or other basic features.
Yeah, I was a vice president of General Motors for 10 years. And now when you look at an automobile, it's basically chips and software surrounded by sheet metal and plastic. So it's critical. And that shortage shut down a number of plants and limited their production. I mean, really billions of dollars worth. And it costs us all kinds of jobs. And I think that, that taught us the vulnerability of that semiconductor supply chain. And that's why the work we did in terms of onshoring TSMC and also writing that CHIPS Act is so strategic in securing the U.S. semiconductor supply chain.
Keith, just switching gears here before I let you go, the FCC has recently voted to ban Huawei telecom products, a Chinese telecommunication company. Keith, you're a very successful businessman, a capitalist. What do you say to those who want the free market to reign in a case like this?
Well, I've already taken a pretty hard stand on that, because when I was under Secretary of State, we developed the Clean Network Alliance of Democracies that put together 60 countries representing 2/3 of the world's global GDP and 200 telcos and a whole host of industry-leading tech companies in this clean network alliance of democracies to not use Chinese telecom. Because if you look at Huawei, for example, this is the most important company to China's national security, or it was, and it's the backbone for their surveillance state that facilitates cultural genocide in Xinjiang. This was the first government-led initiative that defeated China Inc. So what I say to my fellow CEOs, what I've said, is look, out here in Silicon Valley, where I'm based right now, we always say corporate responsibility is social responsibility. It's also national security as well. The capabilities that Huawei has in terms of shutting down our infrastructure, in terms of personal data, corporations' most precious proprietary information, and governments' very important information. That's all at risk if you use Huawei. One of the things we did with the clean network, we expanded it beyond 5G to clean cloud, clean apps, clean store, clean cable, which is underwater cable, and clean carrier. And I think the FCC should ban TikTok as well, applications like that, because they're just sucking in U.S. data and using it as a propaganda tool.
Keith Krach, really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks so much. Always a pleasure.